Now let's talk about price floors. A price floor is a minimum legal price at which a good can be sold. Minimum wage is an example. In the labor market, employees are the sellers and employers are the buyers. Supply and demand analysis predicts that a price floor that is greater than the equilibrium price has 7 effects. First, the market price is greater than the equilibrium price. The price floor tends to set the market price when it is greater than the equilibrium price. Second effect, surpluses tend to occur and to persist. Surpluses tend to occur when the market price is greater than the equilibrium price. As noted above, the price floor tends to be the market price when the floor is above the equilibrium price. In a freely functioning market, the surplus would tend to cause price to decrease. However, the price floor prevents price from falling. Therefore, the surplus persists. The third effect is that the quantity traded tends to equal the quantity supplied. When the market price equals the price floor and is greater than the equilibrium price, the quantity traded is less than the quantity supplied. When the quantity supplied is greater than, When the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, every seller willing to sell cannot find a buyer willing to buy. Since sellers cannot force buyers to buy more than they want, the sellers sell only the quantity demanded, even though this amount is less than the quantity supplied. Fourth effect, the quantity traded tends to be less than the quantity traded in a freely functioning market. The quantity traded equals the quantity demanded at the equilibrium price, and whenever price is above the equilibrium price. Therefore, the quantity traded equals the quantity demanded decreases as price increases from the equilibrium price to the price floor. The table below is an example. Row 1 shows what happens when the market is in equilibrium. When the market price is 10, the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded equals the quantity traded. All three equal 5. Row 2 shows what happens when a price floor makes the market price equal to 13. In this case, the quantity demanded is 8. It's greater than the quantity demanded of 2, and the quantity demanded and quantity traded are both equal to each other. Since the quantity demanded goes from 5 to 2, as price increases from 10 to 13, the quantity traded also goes from 5 to 2, as price goes from the equilibrium to the price floor. The fifth effect, alternative rationing devices emerge to ration the quantity traded among sellers. The price floor means that price cannot ration the quantity traded among sellers. Since the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied, every seller willing to sell cannot find a buyer willing to buy. When every seller cannot find a buyer willing to buy, buyers have greater discretion to pick the sellers from whom to buy and from whom not to buy. Not buying from a seller is not costly because a surplus exists. When a surplus exists, a buyer can easily find other sellers sufficient to sell all of the quantity the buyer wants to buy. Here's 2 examples of alternative rationing devices. First, show favoritism to friends, family, and people of influence. Second, avoid buying from people with characteristics the buyer finds undesirable. The sixth effect of the price floor. Gray markets emerge in which price is below its legal price. Sellers are willing to accept less than the price at which sellers are willing to accept less than the price when the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. Sellers unable to sell all they want to sell at the price floor can earn more profit by selling illegally at lower prices. By selling illegally at lower prices, sellers can increase the amount sold. An example is sweatshops or farms that pay less than the minimum wage, even though they are required by law to pay minimum wage. Workers accept these low wages because the alternative is even worse. Another example is Uber. One reason that Uber is so successful is that regulations in many localities create price floors on fares that taxicabs may charge. The final effect is that producers will develop and use tactics that reduce the real price without reducing the posted price. Here are two examples of tactics that may occur. First, they can increase the quality of the good. Federal regulations created price floors for airlines back in the 1970s and 80s. At that time, airlines competed by offering frequent flights, great meals, attractive stewardesses in designer uniforms. In those days, the term flight attendant did not exist. All attendants were females, and people called them stewardesses. In fact, the airline, which has gone into business since, called Braniff, advertised that their stewardesses wore Gucci outfits on flights. Here's a second tactic. The seller may give the buyer discounts or easier access to other items not subject to price controls. Now, we've looked at what happens when the price floor is greater than the equilibrium price. What happens when the price floor is below the equilibrium price? Supply and demand analysis predicts that a price floor has no effect on market outcomes if it is less than the equilibrium price. The market tends to move towards the equilibrium price. A price floor less than the equilibrium does not prevent price from moving towards equilibrium and therefore has no effect. An example may help. What would happen if the government passed a law making prices for hot dogs less than 2 cents illegal? The answer is nothing. The equilibrium price for the cheapest hot dog I know is way above 25 cents. Since 25 cents is legal, the law would have no effect. Minimum wage is a good example of the effects of a binding price floor. Of course, for the minimum wage to be binding, it must be greater than the equilibrium wage. Where might the equilibrium wage be so low that it is less than $7.25? The answer is when labor is unskilled and plentiful relative to demand. The minimum wage is therefore more likely to be binding for young people than for middle-aged people. The equilibrium wage for young people tends to be lower than for middle-aged people because they lack the job skills and experience that middle-aged people have. The data on employment show that young people are more highly concentrated in low-wage jobs than the general population. The median income in 2011 for all workers was about $50,000. For people aged 50 to 24, the median was only $30,000. This difference suggests that the minimum wage is greater than the equilibrium wage more frequently for young people than the general population. If the suggestion that the minimum wage is greater than the equilibrium wage more frequently for young people than the general population is correct, supply and demand predicts that the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied for many young people. One signal that the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied for labor is a high rate of unemployment. Data on unemployment rates is consistent with this signal. In 2013, the unemployment rate in the U.S. for the general population was 7.4%. For people aged 16 to 19, it was 22.9%, about 3 times as high. The minimum wage is also likely to be binding more frequently for Black people than for white people. The data on employment show that Black people are more highly concentrated in low-wage jobs than white people. The median income in 2011 for white workers was about $52,000. For Black workers, the median was only around $32,000. This difference suggests that the minimum wage is greater than the equilibrium wage more frequently for Black people than for white people. If the suggestion that the minimum wage is greater than the equilibrium wage more frequently for Black people than for white people is correct, supply and demand analysis predicts that the unemployment rate for Black people is higher than for white people. The data is consistent with the prediction. In 2013, the unemployment rate in the U.S. for white people was 6.5%. For Black people, it was 13.2%. 13.1%, which is twice the rate for white people. Combining our analysis of the labor market for young people and Black people suggests that young Black people are really in trouble. It suggests that the minimum wage is most frequently binding on people who are both young and Black. The data is consistent. The median income for Black workers aged 15 to 24 was only $20,000. The unemployment rate in 2013 for Black people aged 15 to 19 was 38.8%. Let me say it again. The unemployment rate in 2013 for Black people aged 15 to 19 was 38.8%. 2013 was not a great year for the economy, but it wasn't a terrible year. And an unemployment rate of 38.8% is really high. An increase in the minimum wage creates winners and losers. The big winners are workers whose wages increase to the new minimum. Of course, their gain may be reduced by employers who reduce benefits. Reducing benefits by giving less vacation, a greater share, making workers pay a greater share of health insurance, and things like that, allows employers to decrease legally the net compensation to workers. Another winner are workers who earn more than minimum wage, but who compete with minimum wage workers. Milton Friedman argued that self-interest motivates the support by labor and trade unions for increases in the minimum wage. The wages at these unions are usually well above the minimum wage. However, as the minimum wage increases, the wage paid to low-skilled workers increases, thereby increasing the demand for and wages paid to highly skilled workers. The big losers are people who would find employment at the equilibrium wage and cannot find employment at the minimum wage. Milton Friedman argued that the minimum wage often hurts the very groups of people. Milton Friedman argued that the minimum wage often hurts the very groups that people with good intentions are trying to help. Since the minimum wage affects most directly groups that tend to earn wages at or near the minimum wage, they are most directly affected by increases in the minimum wage. The people affected most directly are the least skilled workers.